Welcome to the Friday vlog here at the Order of Eden. Today I'm going to talk about Stoicism in The Mandalorian. Now, I want to say right off the bat, huge, massive spoiler warning. If you have not seen the show Mandalorian, don't watch this video. Even if you're like, I never really planned on seeing it anyway, plan on seeing it. Turn off this video, get Disney+. If you like Star Wars, watch The Mandalorian. I can't recommend it highly enough. And if you don't want anything spoiled, you shouldn't want anything spoiled. If you haven't seen The Mandalorian, don't watch this video. Just give me a like and go on your way. Okay? I'm going to spoil everything. Anything is up for grabs. I'm not going through the plot per se, but I'm not going to limit myself to any surprise, anything. Spoilers ahead. Okay. So, I want to talk about Stoicism in The Mandalorian, or the Stoicism of The Mandalorian. So, it's interesting to me today that in this day and age, someone like The Mandalorian would be so popular. In this very soft age, I find it very interesting that without even really trying, we all just kind of gravitate towards this very strong character that is The Mandalorian. I think Netflix's The Witcher has a little bit of that as well, but that's a far less appropriate show, so I'm not going to talk about that too much or review that on this channel. Alright, so what is Stoicism? Fortunately, we're not going to dig too much into Stoicism because it's really a huge, holistic system that embodies cosmologies, and there's a lot to Stoicism. We're really going to talk about the absolute basics of Stoicism. Stoicism was a school of Hellenistic philosophy which was founded by Zeno of Citium in Athens in the 3rd century BC. Okay, it was a philosophy founded in the 3rd century BC. It was popular up until about the 3rd century AD, and even though it doesn't really survive as its own school of philosophy like it used to, it has highly affected so many strains of different things. Really, it affected Christianity quite a bit in a lot of good ways, and Stoicism articulated some truths that were in Christianity, and some of the language crosses over quite nicely, since they were sort of in the same area for a while. So basically, Stoicism teaches the development of self-control and fortitude as a means of overcoming destructive emotions. Also, it says, the philosophy holds that becoming a clear and unbiased thinker allows ones to understand universal reason. It's kind of technical. If you really just think of whatever you think of when you hear the word stoic, it usually means someone who's non-reactive, someone who's not emotional, someone who's kind of just solid during adversity. It was founded by this Zeno of Citium. I've never read Zeno of Citium, but there are many other men you might have heard of. You may have heard of Seneca, great Stoic philosopher, excellent books. Marcus Aurelius was another very famous. I'm probably going to buy his book called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. There's a lot of good stuff in that from what I've heard. So we're not going to talk about full-blown Stoicism, but we are going to talk about the sense of Stoic calm, if that makes sense. Alright, so what I see in The Mandalorian that struck me instantly, by the way, I'm on my second watch through of it. That's why this has been on my mind. I watched it when it initially came out, and I was like, you know what? That's awesome. I'm going to rewatch it. It's been long enough. So I've been rewatching it lately, and I was really struck by some of these things. So what I find stoic about The Mandalorian. For starters, he shows absolutely no emotion. No emotion whatsoever. His face is literally covered by a mask, so every time you see him, he doesn't have an expression on his face. You really can't tell what he's doing unless there's some physical acting involved. You really can't tell his intentions, his thoughts, his feelings. It's all just completely obscured by this mask. He also has a very calm sense of control. If you watch him in his actions, everything's very measured. Yeah, occasionally things go very wrong, and sometimes things are funny, and that's kind of the point. But as you see him going about his work, especially when he's doing his best work, he's always just very calm, and there's a sense of control. He has a sense of control over the situations that he finds himself in. And the Stoic idea is that This allows for decision making. Yes, I know that the man actually has a face and it's not just the mask, but this idea of not showing emotion, this idea of a sense of calm and a sense of control allows him, and it's a tenet of Stoic philosophy, that if you're calm, if you're in control, it actually allows you to make good decisions in the moment and for the future. And the idea in Stoicism is that especially strong negative emotions, even strong positive emotions, clouds your judgment. And I think if we all look back in our lives, we can probably think of very strong negative emotions and strong positive emotions that lead us to make decisions that we wouldn't otherwise. All right, the second thing that I think the Mandalorian has in common with Stoicism is a sense of minimalism. The Mandalorian leads a very simple life. He pretty much takes a job, turns in the bounty, collects the bounty, goes on to the next thing. It has a very Western cowboy feel in a sense, or if you saw a good space cowboy type show, something like Firefly or the movie Serenity, it has that same feel of you do the job and you move on, kind of a wherever the galaxy takes you type situation. He has a very simple life. Nothing about him is particularly flashy, nothing's luxurious. It's just a simple from one place to the next, one job to the next, and he continues on. I think it's also interesting that early on, the substance that he's paid in, the metal, the precious metal that he's given is called Beskar, and what he's paid in gets turned into armor. Okay, so especially in the first few episodes, he gets paid in this silver-looking metal, and that gets forged into armor. And I do have to say, it's not particularly related to Stoicism, but just praise for the show. I noticed it on my second watch through that there are only 2 times where he gets armor forged, and both of those times are when the showrunners put in flashbacks, so you know a little bit about his history, about his parents dying and about him being rescued by the Mandalorians. They call them foundlings, people who are rescued by the Mandalorians and then raised in the Mandalorian culture. So it's really interesting that as the person is forging his armor, gosh, the phone, really? They hung up. So like I was saying, it's interesting that when his armor is being forged, that's the only time that you're getting flashbacks to what forged him as a man, which is just a really clever way to go about that. You don't have to waste any time on exposition or dialogue or just flashbacks. They just happen in these quick little scenes. Forging of his armor shows you what forged him into the man you see today. But the actual point, the money that he makes, this incredibly valuable metal, isn't used for him to get like really nice, nice seats on his ship, nice food, nice drink, any sort of vacation luxury. It just gets turned into armor. So everything that he has produced, everything that he earns, just goes into making him tougher and stronger. And that's a really interesting thing to think about with our own finances. And then the mask in relation to food, as far as the minimalism goes. So he wears this mask and he can't take it off in front of anyone else. So this is almost more monastic, but it definitely links to Stoicism. There were elements of this. Because of his devotion to this way of life, there are scenes where he actively refuses to eat or drink when other people are eating or drinking because he can't take his mask off. I guess technically he could use some sort of straw to drink things, but that would not look nearly as cool as I'm sure he would like to. So because of his devotion to this way of life, he actually forgoes food and drink on a very it happens several times in the show where other people are eating. He takes little Yoda to a place where they get him food. Yoda's drinking like this bone broth soup, and the Mandalorian is just kind of sitting there because he's not going to eat or drink in front of people. So in order to keep in line with his values, he's actively fasting, in a sense. He actively lives a harder life simply to keep in line with his values. All right, so we talked about no emotion, minimalism, and 3, this is the way.
This is the way.
So I'm referring, of course, to this phrase that's repeated, this is the way, really is an embodiment of their whole honor code. What's the way? Whatever Mandalorian concept they just stated. That's the way. That's the way it is. He lives by an honor code, which is unheard of in the 21st century. And yet we're drawn to it. That's really interesting. So in Stoicism, there's this line that virtue is sufficient for happiness. So that if you just lead your life according to certain Stoic virtues, what results is happiness in a deep sense, not in a passing transitory sense, but in a deep sense. Christians would probably call it joy or contentment, but this idea of virtue is sufficient for happiness. So he sticks to this honor code, this virtue code to live his life by. So the mask. I've talked about the mask for all 3 points. It's such a big feature of who the Mandalorian is. The mask. I believe it's episode 4. It's called Sanctuary. So when the Mandalorian and Little Yoda, they kind of stop off at this, it almost reminds you of feudal Asian rice paddies, but this village that I think they're harvesting krill or some blue crawdaddy looking animal. And they're having trouble with basically local raiders who have an AT-AT or however you pronounce that. So he's having a conversation with a female bounty hunter, and she's asking what happens if you take the mask off. And he said, if I take the mask off, I can't put it back on. That basically he could just take his mask off and spend the rest of his life with this beautiful villager woman and never go back to the chaos that he had before. But the point is, in a sense, you might think, well, taking his mask off has no repercussions. But he can never go back to the honor code. He can never go back to his way of life before, his culture, his people. He's living his life by a very strict honor code. Because where we would say, oh, great, you can just give up this life anytime you want, it's not that simple of a thing, is it? You can walk away from your family anytime you want. Why wouldn't you do it? It's the same kind of thing. Yes, that's theoretically true in certain regards, but you don't, because certain things are extremely important to you. And it's interesting seeing someone who, it's not, well, yes, the Mandalorians are people and he knows Mandalorians. He's oriented around this code of conduct, around this sense of virtue, around this honor code.
This is the way.
And that's central to everything he does. And he has a strict sense of culture. And it's not really Stoic. The Stoics don't really have some strict culture. But it's interesting in modern day. So again, everything they do is linked to their Mandalorian philosophy and mythology in that home world where they rode these like dinosaur-like creatures, and that's sort of some backstory that's not really in the show. But he has this strict sense of identity that's tied to being a Mandalorian. And it's also worth noting that he wasn't actually born a Mandalorian. He was the foundling. He was sort of adopted into it. He was taken under the wing of the Mandalorians. And he's still ruthlessly loyal to this culture. And in the 21st century, it's odd that we find that compelling, because everything that is pushed on us today tells us not to. Tells us to sort of abandon any distinctives that we really have, any historical distinctives, and just kind of go along with the current narrative. So that's not really Stoic, but it is interesting in the 21st century. All right, so what can we learn about Stoicism within the Mandalorian? In an age of expressing yourself, maybe it's okay to actually control your emotions. All right? That's not a popular thing to say to a lot of people. But don't believe people who say that you can't control your emotions. We all know the angry guy who blames it on being Irish, and sometimes you're just an angry person who needs to get your life together. Also, it's worth taking the lesson to just lead a more simple life. Sometimes I find myself doing this well, sometimes I do it very poorly. Sometimes life gets too complex, not because of what's dumped on us a lot of times, but because of what we take on voluntarily. But it's worth leading a simpler life, a tougher life, to deny ourselves some things to grow. Denying yourself almost anything is extremely unpopular in this day and age, but maybe it's worth looking into some sort of fasting to deny yourself, or maybe it's worth looking into some sort of really heavy exercise regimen, some sort of strict weightlifting regimen to actually grow and get tougher and stronger in every way. Maybe live a simpler life, live a harder life, live a tougher life, a life that's more based in denial and not extravagance. Not extravagance might be too strong of a word, because then we won't tend to see ourselves if I say extravagance. Just, it's better to live a difficult life sometimes than to live a life that's just lazy and has no resistance and is ultimately kind of pointless. Also, maybe we try to figure out what our honor code is and actually live according to something bigger than ourselves. So for me, that's rooted in Christianity, and I think we all pick up little things that speak to us more as human beings in our particular situations. I can follow the Bible, and then certain areas of it will be more important to me at certain times than others, just because of who I am, what age we're living in. Maybe we have to find out what our honor code actually is. What are the things that we live by regularly? What mask won't we take off for anyone? And when it comes time to actually give things up for the sake of that mask, that honor code, will we do it? Won't we do it? It's hard to say. But I think there are some great lessons to be learned from Stoicism and from the way it's expressed in The Mandalorian. In such a soft and easily offended age, it's nice that we have a hero who's brutal and gritty and minimalist and also thoughtful. This isn't a video about that, and I need to stop. But he also kind of has a facsimile of a heart. He is taking care of this little baby Yoda child, whatever it is. He also has a sense of honor and obligation towards this innocent life. So he's not a monster, but he's definitely not soft, and he definitely won't be pushed around. There's a lot to learn there. So that's it for me today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
This is the way.